Welcome to The Spawn Chunks, episode number 311 for Monday, August 19th, 2024. This is a podcast all about Minecraft, available across all major podcast platforms, including now in video on YouTube. If you're enjoying the show, consider subscribing wherever you're listening to this, or perhaps watching. My name is Johnny, but the internet knows me as Pixel Riffs, and joining me, as always, is a perfectly audible Joel Duggan. Hi, Joel.
Perfectly? It's a lot of pressure, especially for the amount of information that we have to get to you in this episode. But if you'd like to hear a little bit more about audio recording, some of our new studio gear and plans for upgrades, that's what we've been talking about in the render distance. During the beginning recordings of each week, we sit down with our patrons in the Discord and we chat a little bit extra about just about anything. And this week it happened to be about recording, podcasting, listening habits, all that kind of stuff. You can get that at patreon.com/thespawnchunks. Just become a member. You get to join the Discord. You get access to the render distance, which has both a pre and a post show. It's about 30 minutes of extra audio that you get every week. And there's also the monthly Minecraft Hangout that usually happens on the last Saturday of the month. This month it is August 31st. That's going to be live in our Discord, and that's where we hang out with our patrons and talk about what they've been building in Minecraft, complete with lots of screenshots and a log that you can go through after the fact and check out all the different images that we talked about on that recording.
Some fantastic builders in this community as well. Like, I've been genuinely
really cool
impressed
stuff
with a lot of the stuff that we've seen recently. But let's talk about our own building. I think we've both been doing some of it this week. What's new on the Citadel, Joel?
I have been continuing on with the build of the refurbished iron farm on the Citadel, and it is now into the aesthetic retrofit phase. The functions have all been completed. Everything is working as desired. I have not done any landscaping on the mountain that originally I thought I was going to tear down, but as I've been working, we've had no golems spawning outside of the water trap, which means that I really don't have to completely destroy the mountain. I can just kind of change it however I feel like it. I'm not going to have to worry about spawn proofing it. And so what I've done is, while trying to maintain the spirit of the original four-legged door design that we had before, this still has the four columns, but I've changed the bottom into what looks like a melting pot. So instead of all spruce columns, it's now got basalt columns and a big deep slate tile, and I've got a custom black nether brick texture. So I've used that, and it looks like a big melting pot for the golems. There's several lava sources inside. I've reduced the height of that, so the killing chamber is now just a block lower. So you just get to see the flames of the golem when you look through the windows of the melting pot, so you can see the golems actually being melted inside. I've updated all the collection system inside as well. That still needs some aesthetic changes. I'm going to go through and make that a little bit clearer. All of that is happening when I eventually add the crafter, which was the original intention behind this build. Was like, oh, 1.21, I'm going to use a crafter for the first time and learn how to use it. Still haven't used a crafter. It's been 2 weeks.
Cut to 2 weeks later, and I've still been redesigning the iron farm.
Builder Joel is still redesigning the iron farm. Anyway, it's been a lot of fun, and this week I took the base of it and started going up into the sky and doing my best to change it from like a basic box into something a little bit nicer. And I've added a few things at the bottom that I'm trying to implement at the top, and I've been using copper. And I've been watching some Hermitcrafts. Tango does a lot of steampunk stuff, and I like the idea of using acacia and copper blocks as piping. And so I've added some steam pipes to the bottom, and then I started adding copper to the top, and that actually helped me solve, or begin to solve, one of the problems, which is the top of it, when you want to hide the zombie and hide the villagers, is basically just a box. And I don't want it to be just a box. And so I've started to add the copper to the top as supports. And then I just had this epiphany this week. Well, wait a minute. What if the supports are still wood, but there's copper piping swirling all around the top? And it starts to look almost like a brain, sort of. It looks like machinery instead of a weird timber box in the sky. And so I'm hoping to continue with that. And it's still very much a work in progress. There is going to be a few screenshots in our Discord as well as in our show notes, but there's a sandstone platform that's just temporary, just because you can't scaffold horizontally far enough to work on something this high up. And so I'm just kind of using that to get all of the different nuances in there. It still doesn't look too much like the original. However, I have to spawn proof any of these blocks that stick out. So there's a lot of moss carpet on the top of the build right now that keeps the golems from spawning on the top of it. And there's a lot of buttons right now on the copper pipes, which just was a very easy way to add acacia buttons to them to spawn proof them temporarily. But I think what I'm going to do to help this look like the original is, instead of the buttons, I'm going to have some mossy overgrowth kind of hanging over the top and underneath of the farm. And that way it'll have a decorative aspect, but because bush blocks and leaf blocks are all spawn proof, it will also spawn proof the pipes, and I don't have to necessarily worry about it. And I can have a combination of like moss blocks, moss carpet, azalea leaves, and do all that kind of stuff. I'm on the fence if I'm keeping the green glass and concrete chute that was originally there in the first farm, but it was only 6 blocks tall, and now it's 60 blocks tall, and so it does kind of feel a little strange. I think I might be either removing it entirely or adding a lot of moss undergrowth underneath the platform, and I could do that in a way where it creates the funnel for the golems to fall in. And as long as the golems don't drift left or right, either way coming down, then they'll still end up in the melting pot. So I could completely remove the shaft and just have them fall through the air, which would be cool. So I might test that out. It's not a terrible thing to remove or put back once I've got the underside of it all taken care of. So we'll have to see. But right now I'm pretty happy with it. I do like the copper bulbs. They've been fun to work with. And I want to light it so it looks cool at night. And I don't yet think I have enough lighting. But I think what I'm going to end up doing is hiding lights within the foliage. And I can also use glowberries to light it up as well from the underside. So that's coming. That's probably coming later on this week.
Yeah, dude, this rules. Like, I really like
Thanks,
the kind of copper pipe aesthetic to it. Really helps it feel industrial in a way that's not so obviously tied to iron golems as well. You could have like iron blocks everywhere, but I feel like there's less you can do with those compared to copper now, because iron is so used for all of like the mechanical components, but not so much for like aesthetic blocks, which is what copper is really intended for, and not much else. But I think, yeah, you've got a really cool setup here, especially at the bottom where it feels like this kind of furnace, and you've got these stacks of molten stuff going on the sides with the magma blocks and stuff. I think those look really great. Have you got like campfires down there providing the smoke as well? So it looks a little bit of animation thrown in there along with the golems burning. Like that's smart. Like I think that's a really complete feeling build, at least at the bottom of it. I know you said you wanted to make a few more changes. I like the copper and green look as well. Like copper, green, and wood, like they all go together really nicely. Kind of reminds me of those like, I've seen it a couple of places and I've emulated it a couple of times in Minecraft where you have like a copper wall that like moss and other kind of like wall climbing plants are growing on, and it feels it feels a little bit kind of fancy, like modern interior. You can do some really neat decor with that. And obviously when copper starts to oxidize, it doesn't feel too dissimilar to that greenish color anyway. So you can blend in some of the more aged copper blocks if that's your bag. But I think with the shiny copper, it still all looks really nice. Are you planning on letting any of that age, or is that all like waxed copper?
It's waxed currently because it's all next to the wood, and when it started to go green, it started to look a little bit funny next to the wood.
Doesn't suit the acacia and
yeah. I might change my mind on some of the stuff that's embedded, like the copper bulbs and the copper blocks next to the bulbs. Those I might let age, because once there's a green leaf block in front of them, it might make more sense for them to have more green in them, right? The only trick there is that, of course, when the copper bulbs age, they get dimmer. Yeah. So I may have to kind of keep those where they are. I also do want to continue to try to match it to the moss farm, which is across the way in the lake. And the moss farm has a lot of shroom lights in it. Yeah. And so I might end up switching these copper bulbs at the top to shroom lights, depending on what kind of aesthetic I want. But all of the molten sort of vibe is down the very bottom. And so I might keep it more technical looking at the top, and then and not heated, so to speak. Yeah. And then have all the warm tones and like the steam and the piping and stuff like that happening more at the bottom. But there's still some landscaping to do. I have to rethink the way that we approach the iron farm now, because the nether portal, the storage, and the door basically is like a block from the rear footing, so it's really inconvenient to go in and out of the storage room now. I'm gonna have to completely change the way that works. Maybe not even have a door there. Maybe have the door to the moss farm be the only door to go into the nether. I do have lots of room inside the mountain to mess around, so we'll have to see. But that's gonna be the fun technical part of like changing the way that it's collected, compressing all the things, getting like bone meal, maybe making some red and some pink dye out of the poppies. Like there's a lot of crafter shenanigans I want to get into once I'm done with this. I do want to try to keep the portal location because it goes to the nether in our nether hub, which has got various portals nearby. So like I really don't want to start messing around with portals too much. So if I can keep the portal where it is and then have the chests and the storage change position, then as long as it's still convenient for people to pop out of the portal, grab some iron and be on their way, then everything else is just kind of gravy at that point.
Yeah. Has it been fun building something that isn't medieval? Like having spent so long out in West Hill that you're like, oh, good, other build styles that I can... What do you mean I can put copper pipes in this? They haven't discovered copper over in West Hill yet. Like,
it's less that and more of like different shape languages,
totally.
Fun colors. It has a function. Also, the fact that a lot of the farms in the area have been designed in a certain way for years. Like I use bright glass, bright concrete, and like log supported water flumes to move everything around. And that was way back in like 1.12, 1.13 when we first started the spawn chunks. And so to have some of those farms established nearby, you're not going from a complete blank slate. You're like, okay, well, I have an idea for this, but I have a block palette nearby to work with. I can use some of the new 1.21 or 1.18 blocks as well, because it's been so long since I've worked in the area. But I definitely have been enjoying the different shape language and the different tone from West Hill. I'll still return to West Hill and very much enjoy wrapping that up. But I think I needed a break from all the landscaping. And now I've built a thing. I'm also very quickly getting tired of being this high in the air, trying to design something in survival. Like I'm so sick of falling off of stuff, of trying to jump off of scaffolding, which apparently you can't jump off of ever. Like there's a lot of stuff where I'm just like, scaffolding, why? And so there will be a reprieve to being back in West Hill on the ground, where the highest I have to go is 6 blocks, and it's like, sweet, okay, I'm making a field, good.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I can sympathize because I've been making a field after a fashion. I've been doing a lot of terraforming while you've been taking a break from it. So the main thing I've been up to in the Minecraft Survival Guide, which is why videos from the series are taking a while, is I've moved out to this new project area, mentioned it on the show before. It's about 6,000 blocks away from spawn, and I have a very convenient ice boat road out to it now, which means I really have no excuse for actually doing something with the landscape. And so what I've done is transform it from standard Minecraft landscape into something that's got a bit more structure and a lot smoother of the green rolling hill environment. Because naturally, when you go out to a plains biome, especially in my world where I seem to have lucked into a lot of really cool elevation changes, especially around these mountainous areas where I've got 2 frozen peak mountains with cherry groves surrounding them, and then this gradual slope down onto the plains where the sunflowers and everything growing. I find that there's a lot of very choppy areas of the landscape that needed to be smoothed over, that needed to be like rolled flat and like start to curve a lot more gently if I was going to work with them in any kind of building capacity. And the cool thing is, I've got 3 years worth of you sharing your experience with changing the landscape around West Hill to pull from. So I've been working with a lot of the same stuff that you've been working with, kind of making sure that the inclines in blocks aren't like staircases that the player has to jump up. It's much more like, you've got 5 or 6 blocks worth of room before the next change in elevation, and just working with the terrain a little bit more. I've decided to shape some of the larger hills in the area into more like plateaus. So I've been building stone walls around them that feel kind of more like cliffs that rise out of the landscape. And again, this is sort of partly inspired by some fantasy concept art I've seen playing through the Elden Ring DLC, and how much of that relies on changes in verticality to limit how the player travels. So you have to go through a certain area because you're traveling on a horse, and you take full damage and die if you drop above a certain distance. So obviously, you can't do much about that in Minecraft because the player has Elytra, and full damage is like, when you've got feather falling and protection, it's like 100 blocks is the only thing that's going to kill you. And I'm not working with elevation changes that steep, but there are natural caves in this area as well. So some of the large cliff faces, even though from the angle I provided the screenshots, they look like they are just coming from the ground up. They actually fall another 20 or so blocks into what is effectively like an open air cavern kind of space. And I'm thinking about including that in the design of the city as well. So maybe they have like a subway system down there that they use to get around, or maybe there's like an undercity kind of black market area, or there's like a lower section where the lower classes end up living, forced down by the people who build above that. And, you know, it could be anywhere from like Final Fantasy VII's Midgar, where it's very kind of like class warfare kind of stuff going on. There's a lot of like, you know, tension between the people who live in the city above and the people who are forced down to live below. Or it could be more like utopian, where there's like a lot of amazing architecture and stuff, and they don't consider the area under the ground necessarily like beneath them, like in the metaphorical sense. They can, you know, work on more technological stuff down there. Maybe that's where I put the next phase of my copper aging machines. You know, I have like long-term plans that could go in any number of directions, but it's really just about shaping it out into an area that I feel comfortable building and that doesn't feel unrealistic to build in, with the amount of like sudden elevation changes and little hills that can't really amount to anything that's going to inspire me to build there.
This is exciting, man. I really like the cliff changes. Immediately was thinking like he's been playing a lot of Elden Ring. I can see the influence of the cliffs, and then like the slope that goes between the cliffs that allows you to get up to something, and you can see like that's going to be a road somewhere, and it's going to be an approach, and then you're going to be able to frame that approach and like control what the player sees and have them look directly at something cool. Obviously, you've got this great ice mountain in the background and the cherry grove that surrounds that as well. Like it's going to be some really, really scenic landscaping. And I want to point out to people that might be looking at these two screenshots in our show notes and being like, yeah, okay, that's a cool change. That's a lot of work.
It is.
I know it looks like a blip. Like it looks like one of those tests in a book. Like, can you spot the difference between these two images? I'm just like, yeah, it's about 20 hours of work going in there and reshaping things. And especially when you are taking inspiration. I love taking inspiration from the Minecraft landscape and then like amping it up. Like here's where it got hilly. Let's make it cliffy. Like here's where there's like this cavern or entrance to a cave. Let's make it this abyss or this huge kind of like ravine, and let's use, rather than pave over it, like let's use it. Let's figure out how to use it. And while you were speaking, I was thinking about Arcane. Did you watch the Arcane series?
I didn't. I've seen a lot of like clips from it and people sharing GIFs and whatnot online, but I've not seen an episode. Yeah, you
would really, really like it. And it has that tiered level of like utopian city down to rough tumble, down to like the grease and the grime and the underbelly and the no one goes down here because they're scared kind of levels of stuff. And the deeper you go, the more mechanical things get. Like the people on top are benefiting from all the mechanics working and all the furnaces and all the smelting and all that happening, but they don't like to think about it because it's grimy and gross and all that kind of stuff. They're in their white dresses and their fancy clothes and all their magic up top, but then down below it's all very, very grimy. And I can absolutely see like your copper aging machine or a transport system, minecarts. Like you could do all kinds of cool stuff, especially if you add movement. Like when you're looking down the ravine, you can see like minecarts going by, or you have steam coming out of places. Like that could be really, really cool. I'm excited for this.
Yeah, and depending on what happens with the changes to minecarts that we're going to be discussing in a second, like it could get pretty hectic down there. But yeah, I do like the idea of the underbelly of the city being more mechanical. The main thing I have in mind is because I've arrived on that iceboat road and I want to continue it through the portal and out the other side, having some kind of like monorail that goes to some of the upper buildings of the city and maybe has like stations that are inside a building, like you put a tube through a building and they've got a walkway that can lead out from there, and like being able to get around a little bit that way if you're up top, and then maybe figure out what are some like different transportation systems that could be implemented further down, whether that's like running around on soul sand, so you're running super fast if you're wearing the right shoes, or it could be, you know, just minecarts to get from place to place, or like a variety of different things. And like I want this to feel like a very layered project and working with verticality, even though, as you said, it's a pain when you end up building it and having to fall off scaffolding every 5 minutes. I think there's so much opportunity to build that way in Minecraft that we so rarely take, because it's easier to build on the flat. It's easier to expand outwards. There's so much space. you run into different biomes eventually, and you run out of render distance eventually. So I'm trying to work within a large but contained space and see just what I can build up on top of itself from there.
And really tricky where you are doing this on the survival guide, which is pure vanilla, because we've got free cam on the Citadel, and that's what I've been using just a ton to stay up high, stay on the platform exactly where I need to be building, and just back up by 40 blocks and look at the thing and see, like, I can't tell whether this design works because I'm 2 feet from it. But if I back up and say, okay, yeah, that pipe going that way looks good, and this pipe going that way looks good, it saves you so much time not have to fly away with Elytra, turn around, try to look at something while you're going 60 miles an hour in the air, and then land back on the platform, which may or may not be the size of a thimble, and try to go from there. And having those tools makes building in the air a lot easier. So to go about it in survival, again, it's like another tip of the hat. Like, that's not only is a lot of work, it's quite challenging to figure out if you don't have any other tools to view from different angles.
Yeah, that is what I've been doing, is flying back and forth with Elytra to the specific spot that's in the pictures that are in the show notes, just because that's where I was picturing a lot of this stuff from, so it helps to like reset my feeling about like what needs to happen to this view, and that's the direction people are going to be entering from, assuming you're coming from the ice boat road to begin with. But naturally, this has been juxtaposed with a bit more stream time on Fantasy Minecraft SMP. It's been really fun. I'm finding blissfully few crafting rabbit holes for a mod pack. Like, there are so few things that like lead you down this, well, I've got to craft this in order to craft that, and then like it takes you back 5 steps until you're making like the individual components that make one part of a larger crafting recipe. A lot of it, in this case, because I was trying to get some decent armor, was just find a diamond chestplate or make a diamond chestplate, upgrade it to netherite, and then combine it with these 2 other materials in a smithing table, and you've got this really cool looking like Dark Knight armor with the big shoulder pads and like the cloak and everything. And so that part has been kind of fun. So it's really just about finding those resources. In-game, I'm finding that there are some really interesting tools to find and loot structures, because it's not going to apply the structures in the same way that like a vanilla seed does, so you can't just go to chunk base and find out where a desert temple is. There are explorer compasses in this mod pack that let you go, that you choose from like a big list of all of the structures that are in the mod pack, and it doesn't feel very Minecraft because you're literally clicking on like, okay, where is the nearest jungle temple from this like mod config list almost, and then it just gives you a direction to that, and the compass points to whatever the nearest temple is. But because the looter mod makes it possible for the loot in the chests to be per player, I don't have to worry about looting a structure and leaving nothing for somebody else. Like, I can go to the same structure as somebody else has and I still get stuff. So I've not felt too bad about going and raiding a couple of these jungle and desert temples to get diamonds. And then, as usual, diamonds are the bottleneck towards like the higher tiers of gear anyway, unless you want to go down like a really long quest progression and have the game reward you with certain stuff. Like, I wanted to at least feel comfortable with my equipment before I started going and taking on bosses and that kind of thing. In the process of this, I raided a treasure bastion, which I'm used to normally having a guaranteed netherite upgrade template in the central section of a treasure bastion. But because this mod pack provides so much extra loot from all of the different like fantasy accessory mods and stuff, the loot table was completely overstuffed, and it had no netherite upgrade template for me. Fortunately, a couple of other folks on the server had already found one, and so, you know, they haven't modded out the netherite upgrade template. It is part of the progression to get netherite equipment, and so, yeah, I had to beg, borrow, or steal some upgrade templates and clone them with more diamonds in order to get there. So feeling the pinch a little bit, especially with so many other materials. When you go mining, you're always finding like mithril and stuff, and I'm like, well, this doesn't necessarily help me. Like, it sounds cool that I found it, and maybe I'll turn it into some cool armor later on, but for right now, like, I'm not sure what to do with this other than make a pickaxe and move on. So yeah, I'm still working my way through the tool progression and just sticking to the vanilla stuff that I know, but finding ways to like modify it aesthetically and make it cool looking.
I've always found that's the trouble with modded Minecraft minerals, is that you don't know whether you're finding something that's like end game, like has someone planned this to be beyond diamond? Is it supposed to be between diamond and netherite?
Yeah.
Is it supposed to be smelted or combined into an alloy some other way later? Or is it something like before copper was in vanilla Minecraft, when you find copper, you're thinking, all right, well, copper is kind of a soft metal in real life. So this is probably more of a mid-tier between stone and iron, or just after iron for me to use now as opposed to later. So then you go hunting to see what's available to use it with. And I've always found that tricky, especially if the thing that you're finding is not a normal mineral from the real world, like copper or iron. It's more like you said, mithril, or like toxinite, or some purple thing that's shiny. It's like, I don't know what to do. Like, what mod pack is that from, and what does it do? Is it magic? Is it mineral? Is it metal? Is it alive? Like, what does it do? And I find that that's always tricky.
Yeah, and there's some of the armor and stuff that I wouldn't know it was there if it wasn't for REI, like telling me, like the big interface on the right hand side showing me like, okay, if I type chest plate, here's all of the cool options that come up. But it gives you stuff to work towards, so I'm getting into the workflow of that. In the meantime, though, big things are happening in vanilla. So we're going to move on into the news, where we have a Java edition snapshot. This is snapshot 24W33A, and it begins, quote, "We know you have been waiting a long time for the next update, and we are finally kicking off the new snapshot cycle. Over the summer, we finished 200 bug fixes. This update also features a bundle of new experiments that we are eager for you to try out." And so, naturally, as the little preamble suggests, that does include bundles. Bundles are now in experimental features in 24W33A, and as the changelog says, a bundle only fits one stack, usually 64 items, but it can be a mixture of many different item types. You can insert items into a bundle directly in the inventory, and bundles have a tooltip that shows the items inside. If a bundle has fewer than 8 item types inside, the tooltip will show all of them. Otherwise, the tooltip will show the top 2 rows of items, and the others will be hidden below. You can select any of the visible items to pull out of the bundle, right-click to take the first item, or use the number keys or scroll wheel to select a different item, then right-click to take it. There are a couple of developer notes that accompany these, but we'll let you read the article that's linked in our show notes if you want the full inside scoop on that. In the meantime, when selecting an item to remove, the bundle icon will show that item poking out of the bundle. When you're holding a bundle in your hand, you can empty it onto the ground by right-clicking. The bundle is now crafted with 1 string above 1 leather, and the controls for the bundle have changed from its original prototype. You left-click to put an item into a bundle, and right-click to remove the top item type from a bundle. When the bundle tooltip is visible, you can use number keys or the mouse wheel to select a different item type, then use right-click to remove it. Along with the bundle, there are also some redstone experiments in this one. Added in the experiments panel, you can enable them by selecting redstone experiments from the experiments menu when creating a new world. It also says, please note that the experimental features behind this toggle are not aimed at any future release at this time. Instead, this is a place for us to try out changes and gather feedback. We're excited to hear what you think about these changes, so please share your feedback over at feedback.minecraft.net. The performance impact of redstone wire, also known as connected blocks of redstone dust, has now been improved. Redstone wire now only triggers block updates on blocks that may receive power from the wire. Before a line of wire causes block updates, the new signal strength of all connected wires is set, and the update order around redstone wire has been changed. The aim is to make wire work the same independent of position and orientation. When possible, the order is deterministic based on the context the updates are caused in, and when there is not enough context to fully determine the order, the rest is picked at random. In layman's terms, that means that if you have a chain of redstone devices, like dispensers, for example, and a line of redstone dust that follows along next to them to activate them, then they activate in order from the source of the redstone signal to the end, instead of activating in a sort of random order as though they'd just been chosen at random. Even though they sort of did that consistently in the previous version of Redstone, this is actually activate them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so forth down the line. The order in which a line of wire changes. When a line of wire turns on, the wires closer to the power source will cause block updates first. When a line of wire turns off, the wires closer to where the power source was will cause block updates first. When 2 wires have the same distance to the power source, Which of them causes updates first is now picked at random. The random choice is made once for the entire line of wire to limit the amount of possible outcomes. This means when powering a line of wire from the side, it randomly chooses one of two possible update orders. The advantage of having few possible update orders is that the results are more predictable. In terms of block updates around a wire, the order in which blocks around the wire update is based on the direction the wire received an update from. Currently, the order is back, front, left, right, down, up. Left and right may be swapped depending on the random choice made by the line of wire. When the updates are further distributed through solid blocks, the same order is applied there. There are some known issues with this, as this experiment only changes redstone wire. Interactions with other components may not always act as expected, especially when it comes to update orders. In addition to that, there are also some minecart improvements. They've added new experiments containing various movement changes to minecarts, and, quote, the long-term goal is to make vehicle travel like minecarts a viable option for players compared to other late-game options which currently dominate most playstyles. To achieve this, we aim to make riding minecarts a smooth experience with consistent and predictable motion and rotation. With this feature toggle, we are laying a foundation to build upon in the future. We're aware that these changes will break some existing contraptions, which is why we want to collaborate with the community to shape the upgrade and future experience of riding minecarts. Please note that the experimental features behind this toggle are, once again, not aimed at any future release at this time. Instead, this is a place for us to try out changes and gather feedback. So in the movement changes, minecarts will articulate their movement better when going fast, riding on the rail all the time. Minecarts will now smoothly turn along with the track and are less likely to halt or derail. Minecarts can now jump better. They keep their vertical momentum when the track ends with a slope. Minecarts will tilt to visually articulate while in the air, and no rail grinding sound is played when minecarts are flying through the air. They've added a new accessibility setting that makes players follow the rotation of minecarts they ride. The default setting is off. They've added a new game rule, minecart max speed, that changes the maximum speed of minecarts. The default is 8 blocks per second, and this can go up to 1,000 blocks per second. Setting it to a specific value does not guarantee the minecart will reach that particular max speed. There are built-in air resistances and similar effects to the speed which need to be overcome by powered rails. Minecarts can no longer be placed within another minecart by the player or a dispenser. Minecarts can now consistently be placed next to each other along a track, and now pick up mobs more consistently when moving along a track. In terms of the known impact of these minecart changes, Mojang is aware that these changes will make certain contraptions such as piston bolts not work at all or have their behavior changed. They also add that very delicate rail networks will have their timings changed due to slight changes in speeds, movement distance, and friction, etc. Also, contraptions that rely on minecarts snapping to rails will no longer work, or they may have their behavior changed.
Changes in 24W33A. Various items and blocks have had their assigned rarities changed. You can read the full spread of those rarity changes in the changelog that we'll have linked in our show notes. Mojang has tweaked portal cooldowns for vehicles and projectiles. After using a nether portal, minecarts and boats now only need to leave a portal for 0.5 seconds in order to use that portal again. That's down from 15 seconds. After using another portal, projectiles such as ender pearls and arrows now only need to leave the portal for 2 ticks to use the portal again, or any portal again. This is also down from a previous 15 seconds. Breeze no longer have a minimum distance required to attack a target. Added a new death message when players are killed by a mace smash attack. Wolves can now also be fed cod, salmon, cooked salmon, tropical fish, pufferfish, rabbit stew, to achieve parity with Bedrock. Banner patterns have new names and new icons. Smithing templates items are now named after the template type instead of the generic smithing template name. The game will now limit the maximum frame rate when it is minimized or when a player is AFK. A new video setting has been introduced to configure this behavior. Minimized limits the frame rate to 10 FPS only when the game is minimized. AFK limits the frame rate to 30 FPS when the game is not getting any player input for more than 1 minute, and AFK further limits the frame rate to 10 FPS after another 9 minutes of no input. The flight distances and cooldowns for bees have been tweaked. Bees now wander around randomly for less time after exiting a nest or hive. Bees are now less likely to get lost, get stuck on corners, or pathfind to flowers that they cannot reach. Trial chambers have added new variants to the hallways as well as including encounters, quote unquote, which are short challenges leading to a larger chamber within those hallways. Beds in intersections now have their colors randomized, and the empty chests at the entrance to a chamber have been replaced with a hopper and a barrel to better show players that these are meant for disposal and inventory management. Technical changes in 24W33A, the data pack version is now 49, and the resource pack version is now 35. There are a number of behind-the-scene technical changes to the data packs and resource packs with regards to network protocol, data pack structure, data-driven registries, tags, item components, and shaders. Once again, there's a link to our show notes if you'd like to review the full changelog. Fixed bugs of note in 24W33A. TNT submerged in water can destroy item frames, paintings, armor stands, and other similar entities. String can be duplicated using tripwire hooks. Bone meal is consumed when used on fern, grass, and seagrass, even when it cannot grow. Likewise, you can also use bone meal on sea pickles in situations where it will not grow. You cannot use the control Q in the crafting table interface. Filled lava cauldrons are able to be put underwater, and multiple trial chamber templates have missing or incorrect blocks. Those bugs, along with many, many others, have been fixed. For the full list of bug fixes in the new snapshot, visit the changelog at minecraft.net, again linked in our show notes at thespawnchunks.com. We have a quick Bedrock summary this week. Minecraft Bedrock Edition 1.21.20 was published on August 13th. The Bedrock update is fairly straightforward with improvements to performance and stability and general gameplay changes and improvements affecting mobs, blocks, the wind charge, and other items, as well as rendering and UI changes. Minecraft Bedrock Edition Preview 1.21.30.23 was published on August 15th alongside the Java Edition Snapshot. The same bundle experimental feature added in the Java Snapshot was added to the Bedrock Edition Preview. There were no notable changes to Redstone or minecarts in the preview. There were also additional changes to gameplay, blocks, and the game UI, as well as vanilla parity, and a few bug fixes and technical changes. Again, for the full details on the Bedrock Edition changes this week, you can find both changelogs linked in our show notes at thespawnchunks.com.
So this episode would normally be our chunk mail dispenser because it's the third Monday of the month, but naturally this snapshot was so big that we thought we'd dedicate the majority of our main discussion this week to talking about the three major changes in the Java Edition previews. So like the bundles are going to be a big thing that I have a lot to say about, but also the Redstone and minecart changes felt significant enough, even though they're not confirmed for any future update. I think they're really interesting to talk about as a springboard to modifying those mechanics. Let's briefly touch on the Bedrock stuff quickly first. I think it's really cool that Bedrock now has bundles. I would absolutely love to hear from anybody in the community who's picking up the betas and previews as they come out and has had experience working with bundles on Bedrock Edition now. How do they feel for you? Because we've been playing with a version of bundles in Java for a while. That has changed a little bit with this snapshot, but it'd be really interesting to hear from people who play on a variety of control systems. Like, what's working about bundles for you? What feels weird? Are you just excited to have them? Are you still not convinced about how they work? Write in and let us know. The usual email address, spawnchunkmail@gmail.com. Would love to hear from some Bedrock players who've been getting into bundles, especially after we finish up this week's discussion.
I know there's also some similarities between the changes they're making to Java Redstone and the way that Redstone works in Bedrock. So if you're a Bedrock person that is very into Redstone and you have some frustrations that you would like to see changed, or you're seeing the changes that are happening in Java and either for or are against them, again, let us know. We don't have a lot of experience with Redstone in Bedrock, so the more that we can hear from the community, the better. It helps us understand the challenges within the Redstone community on both sides of the fence.
For sure, for sure. So going back to the Java snapshot, there's lots of stuff to pick out that isn't the major changes, like just going into the regular gameplay changes that happen in the second half of the newsread there. It's great to hear that bees aren't going to be quite so accident prone. I love to hear that as somebody who, honestly, even though honey farms are pretty well optimized for efficiency, the sort of item filter design that picks out the honey bottles whenever the bees are able to make them, I would love there to be a more organic approach to farming honey and honeycomb. It feels like giving players more options for that is only possible if bees' behavior improves. And I say that like the bees have been bad and they need to go on the naughty step, but like it was genuinely so difficult to make sure they didn't wander off into unloaded chunks or drown themselves in water or just get stuck on the way back to their nests. So I think it's really good that bees, if they improve significantly in this snapshot are going to feel like they're a little bit more controlled in their behavior, and people who like to farm bee products organically can still let them roam free a little bit.
I do prefer a floaty bee over a breakdancing bee, for sure. I mean,
Yeah.
it might still score more than 0 at the Olympics, but it's still not the most aesthetic thing to happen when you're looking at it in game. I've got a couple of bees in my builds in West Hill that I've used aesthetically because there's a beehive in the back garden. And I remember walking by that cottage I built along the North Road, and the bee was basically like headbutting the roof plank, trying to get to a flower that was underneath the canopy of the roof. And just spinning like a June bug. And it's like, this is, I mean, I expect that from insects in my backyard, but not in a Minecraft setting. And the bee would also go well over the house, like in this giant arc to get to a flower, when really pathfinding and like left or right around the house would make more sense. Like it felt like the bee was flying higher than most birds. And it was very, very, very strange. So I'm happy to see those changes. I think the spinning bee on the spot when they can't find what they're looking for is the one part where you kind of go, oh, okay, I'm playing a video game, right? It kind of takes you out of the moment. If they're just kind of floating around aimlessly, like, well, whatever, it hasn't found the flower yet, that's fine. You see bees do that all the time in real life. So I think that's a good improvement. And I like that Mojang can use these minor updates along the cycle to change stuff like that, even if it's from an older update. You know, we can have the time to fix those bugs, or if it's a current update, like the changes to trial chambers with the encounters in the hallways, and the bigger change, which is the barrels and the hoppers. You know, they get player feedback, they iterate a bit, and they can improve upon the gameplay while the update is live, and it doesn't require like a giant fanfare. Like we're making this a little bit better. We've heard you. There was a number of things that we were working on and testing, but like until sometimes it gets out into the masses, you can't really know how everyone feels about it.
Yeah, definitely. Like, I think it's really cool to see trial chambers in particular still being worked on, and whether that means they didn't quite feel like they got them out in time for their like approved release date, like when they were definitely gonna get 1.21 out and they still need to add in features that were planned during development, or whether it's like, we've got a couple of extra ideas for these now that they're out there and we've seen how players have had a chance to interact with them. I'm wondering if they're going to continue to see tweaks in future major updates. So when 1.22 or 23 comes around, a trial chamber's still going to get like a couple of extra like bolt-on features, or are they trying to like finalize them while 1.21 is still current? Because we're only a couple of months out from when I presume Minecraft Live is going to be happening this year, and at that point we're going to start hearing about 1.22. So I'm kind of curious if trial chambers are just part of, you know, the purview of the team that handles minor updates now, whilst everybody else works on new gameplay features, or is there more of like a collaborative atmosphere for improving trial chambers into the future?
And speaking of features that are going to be coming with a new update that's currently unnumbered or not clear versus updates that are happening this time around in the changes on this snapshot, I imagine some Redstone farm designers will come up with a good way to use the new portal timings for vehicles and the new portal timings for projectiles, because those are not part of experimental features. Those are just listed as the changes within this week's snapshot. And so 0.5 seconds is down from 15 seconds. That's a huge change. I misread it. I thought it was 0.5 down from 1.5, but I read the changelog article again. It's 15 seconds was the previous timing. So that means like if you were removing yourself from the overworld to reset something and then coming back, it's not that you have to wait 15 more seconds before you can go back into the nether again. You know, in these vehicles, you can go back and forth every 0.5 seconds. And I think that's pretty cool. And if you're using projectiles into another portal to keep chunks loaded, I think that's how they use the portals on Hermitcraft for the mail system. There's some sort of chunk loading happening for the mail system on Hermitcraft, and I think they use stuff being shot into portals. And again, like to have that be something that doesn't require like a very specific 15-second timing, I think is really cool. It simplifies it, makes it more accessible for people, and any kind of farm that's using maybe minecarts to remove mobs from a farm and get them into the nether quickly. Again, like you're going to be able to do that a lot faster now.
Yeah, the cool thing is projectiles includes ender pearls, and people were playing around with that initially when they started changing stuff about nether portal timings, and I think you had to set it through a game rule, but by default you couldn't do it. But if you change the cooldown you could throw an ender pearl through a portal. It would go through the nether into another portal that would take you through the overworld, and you could chain together nether portal travel and ender pearl transport so that you could end up really far away in the overworld with one ender pearl throw. And so I think there's potential for using that for fast travel, in addition to stuff with minecarts coming up. And I think there's just going to be a really exciting time for player transport once they start to sandbox out some of these mechanics that feel like they've been static for a while.
Especially if you take into account the arc of an ender pearl.
Yeah.
If that continued through the net, like if the arc and the momentum continued along with the timing, like that is wild. You could travel really far.
Yeah. Yeah, and vertically, and in all sorts of like interesting ways, like
totally.
ender pearling yourself onto the nether roof, but without having to go through bedrock in order to do it. In the meantime, there's other stuff that's still significant and interesting, like parity things, like being able to feed wolves a variety of foods because it happens that way on Bedrock Edition. Why can you feed wolves pufferfish? Like, what benefit does this serve in a game where you feed a parrot a cookie and it dies? Like, I think feeding wolves pufferfish just feels like the weirdest, most incongruous thing. And I guess we already feed wolves rotten flesh with no ill effects, but a pufferfish seems like a step beyond that, considering it applies poison 4 to the player when you do it. So I do wonder if they're going to roll back stuff like that, or maybe change up the effects, give the wolves nausea for a little bit or something. But yeah, I genuinely didn't know you could feed wolves fish on Bedrock Edition to begin with. I think the rabbit stew is nice. Like, I think you're giving a dog like a little bit of like dog food looking like a bowl of food like that. So I think it makes sense for that. The fish I'm less convinced by, especially the pufferfish.
I wonder if there's going to be any feedback from real pet owners saying like, actually, you really wouldn't want to feed that kind of fish to a dog. I mean, cod and salmon make sense, but like pufferfish, like maybe that's really bad, in real life too.
There are people from within our community who I think have already lodged a bug report about this. It's being mentioned in our live show chat as we speak. So yes, I think that's a significant one. But how often are people going to be able to get hold of pufferfish in real life? Is the next question.
Fair.
Right? Curious about
same
that
with
one.
Fireflies and frogs, I guess. Like, just, I don't
sure.
have access to either of those here in my neck of the woods anyway.
It just seems like a strange change when it's been used as the reason that other changes have been made or not been made in the past, right?
Yeah, no, that's fair. I do like some of the smaller changes that were not actually something we read, but were part of the deeper changelog. And the data packs and the resource packs for folks that want to customize things like sounds or custom paintings. Goat horns have been changed to have an instrument assignment, and they have a sound event, a range, a use duration, and a description. And so if you're customizing anything that goat horns do, you could then have like all these kind of variables to control, as well as a description as to what they actually are, rather than just having to remember that this goat horn does this noise or whatever. And then paintings have an author and a title tag or data set attached to them. So if you're doing custom paintings, and you want to include like your artwork or somebody else's artwork, you can also include a byline as well as the title of the piece if you wanted to, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, I think attribution like that is super fun to have. Even if it's just behind the scenes, it helps you keep track of everything and like allows you to credit people if they want credit and so forth. So yeah, I think that's really good. The one last thing I will say before we move on to email is that I think the inactivity FPS limit thing is a really smart idea. I'm glad it's configurable because content creators, like I know this from personal experience, we sometimes go AFK while we're still recording, whether we're trying to record the events of something, just trying to catch something happening, and we're not necessarily away from the keyboard, but we're not touching anything. It's going to limit your FPS to 30 after a minute of inactivity at its current settings, and sometimes I want to talk like without touching the keyboard or the mouse for over a minute, and I try not to fidget too much when I'm delivering a monologue of like how something works and trying to observe the effects of a farm. So I'm quite glad that we can tweak that slightly, but I think if you're minimizing Minecraft, putting it in the background, you want it to be as minimal a drain on resources as possible while you go and look something up and not like overload your PC, especially on like lower performance hardware. I think it's really smart that you can effectively limit the FPS Minecraft is trying to churn out in the background. This was already a thing for like AFK copper farms. the ones that you build in the end dimension that spawn a bunch of reinforcement zombies, and the most effective way to use them to not completely lock up your PC is to like make an instance of Minecraft in like a postcard or postage stamp sized window, and then just leave that running on like minimal settings and have like a whole separate instance set up for that. That's what Azuma and I were doing when he built the copper farm for us on Empires Season 2. Was you set yourself up over there, you log out, you log back in with your 480p instance that can just like sit in the corner of the screen, and that's like, it minimizes the amount of resources that it's using on your PC. So I think having a minimized frame rate as well makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think it's good for the general population of Minecraft players, but for specific situations like content creators and people that are recording what they're doing and running specific farms and things, it's good to have that kind of level of control. They seem to be doing that across the board. When they add certain features like that, they immediately now are pairing that with, and there's a video setting where you can toggle that to your liking. Specifically, if it relates to accessibility, which is always great to see, but in here it's also related to like, we don't want to necessarily tell you how your computer should be performing. We're going to give everybody options on default, but if you know what you're doing, then you can go ahead and just tweak it without having to like dig into the behind the scenes of Minecraft. It's just going to be a control right in the options menu.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And we're going to move on to email now, but obviously this is going to be a snapshot that has a lot of people talking. So if you'd like to email the show, you got any thoughts, any feedback about the snapshot, maybe not criticism directed at Mojang directly, because we aren't them. we're an opinion podcast, but we're not necessarily the people that you want to be talking to if you've got like direct feedback that you want a bit of action on. But you can email us at spawnchunkmail@gmail.com with constructive, fun ideas. And if you want to keep your emails short and to the point, it really helps us include them in the show more easily. Joel is going to read today's email. We just got one today because we know we've got a big discussion coming up.
Speaking of ideas, this one comes from DF Cordova, and the subject line is an idea for the mace. Hi, Joel and Pix. Congrats on 6 years of the show. Well, thanks very much. I have an idea that I think could add a cool new use for the mace and help with reducing more UI being added to the game. What if you could use the mace to crush items? This is how it could work. You throw as many items as you want on a crafting table. They must be in item form, and the more you throw, the more you may damage your mace. Next, you will hit the crafting table with the mace from at least 3 blocks high, and you get a chance of crushing some or most of the items into different ones. The higher you fall for the hit, the better the chances of conversion. For example, you could throw some cobblestone on a crafting table, and then when it is crushed, it could turn into gravel. Crushing gravel could then turn into sand, and so many other possibilities. I think crushing items takes more durability out of the mace compared to combat, just like the sword when used to harvest bamboo. That's the trade-off. I get that most of this can be done with an autocrafter, but I think it's a different way for doing the same thing, and that's something very quote-unquote Minecrafty. Hope to hear your thoughts on it. Cheers. DF Cordova died of fall damage while trying to turn gravel into sand.
That's the other trade-off, right? Is like, do you hit the gravel or not? And I think that's potentially an issue with this if you're using the standard mace mechanics, is if you're trying to target the item entities in the same way that you're trying to hit a mob with the mace, you might miss a lot of the time, and that could be kind of frustrating. Like, I think one of my plans for the mace long term is to try and one-shot every mob in Minecraft with it. The ones I'm not looking forward to are things like bats. Like, I don't think I can hit a bat, like, standing still with a sword or, like, trying to target with a bow. So I can't imagine that anything other than trapping the bat in, like, a 1x1 box is really going to help me hit it from height with a mace. So I'm a little bit concerned that if you're trying to hit, like, thrown item entities, you're running into the same problem. Like, you have a minimal-sized hitbox, and it potentially causes more problems when you're trying to get renewable sand that way. Like, it feels like a little bit of a hurdle for me.
I had the same sort of reaction. I was thinking more about the randomness. I mean, crushing has come up a number of times over the last little while as a new Minecraft way of crafting, or I guess uncrafting as an idea.
Sure.
And I know that people have been talking about less time in a UI is better for the game, but I think crafting is a UI and known UI part of Minecraft. You don't really craft much outside of the UI. I mean, we've got mud turning into clay. There's a couple of things that you can do, but most of the time you're crafting stuff in a UI. And this feels like a very slow, cumbersome way to craft things, especially when you've got that RNG chance of like maybe not controlling how many of the things that you're smashing get changed, having no idea outside of the perfect math ahead of time how much durability your very expensive mace is going to take when you fall from a height to smash something. Are you going to hit it? Are you going to miss it? Are you going to die like DF Cordova did? Are you going to destroy your mace when you successfully smash all of your things into smaller things? And I think that one, it could be, as they mentioned, done in a crafter. And I think the crafter is a better way to handle this kind of thing. But also, I feel like if crushing was introduced into the game, I feel like there could be a different way of doing it, especially with things like pistons in the game. We have other things that allow you to move blocks around in item form, and it would be better, I think, if you could control that. Anything at all that adds motion to the game, like any kind of animation, like if there was a crusher interface, if it was the new crusher block instead of the crafter, if it had an animation that looked like it was smashing stuff internally. You could also use that from a decorative standpoint if it's something that would do that repeatedly. We've seen the crafter used in decoration. If you activate them in sequence, you can create blinking lights and things with the top of them having a redstone texture. And if something similar was able to move with redstone power, then you could also add movement and different things to your build. So I feel like the mace being used for crafting is really a strange and cumbersome idea. Also, how do you communicate that to players?
Yeah.
Like when you have a mace in your hand, your first instinct is to hit other things with it, like players or mobs or enemies, not necessarily like what happens when I try to smash items with it. Like I don't know if that's, you'd almost have to stumble upon that accidentally before that could be easily communicated to the players. Whereas I think something like the sword harvesting bamboo is the most efficient tool. That's just a matter of going up to the bamboo with what you think should chop it down quickly and having that item not do it. And you're like, all right, well, what happens if I try the hoe, the sword? Like, what if I just try all the things? And you discover, oh, the sword quite quickly takes out bamboo, which I would imagine also players would discover by accident if they're running around in a jungle trying to hit something like a mob or a creeper or whatever, and they hit bamboo and it just disintegrates in front of them. They're like, oh, wait a minute, that was really efficient. So I think that there are ways that aspect of the game is communicated clearly, but not necessarily have I ever thought to hit an item on the ground with my pickaxe, my shovel, my sword. Like I've never thought to do that, right?
Yeah, it's just not how you interact with blocks in the game, especially in like a transformative way. Whereas, like, if you were breaking gravel with a mace as a block and it turned into sand, then maybe. But even then, you would have to consider trying that in the first place, and you already know what the tool is for dealing with gravel. It's a shovel. And even then, like, the randomness you were talking about earlier is like how often you get flint out of gravel. Like, that's kind of a similar mechanic you're dealing with if you also introduce RNG on top of that. It would leave me questioning whether I had done something intentional or whether it was some kind of weird glitch,
Yeah.
So codifying those mechanics and having the mechanics be consistent with existing mechanics is really important. I like the spirit of this email, though. I love the idea of maces having a secondary action, something like stripping logs with an axe, something along those lines. It makes them desirable outside of a combat setting. But I think the problem with that is it's a double-edged sword. No pun intended. It risks making them feel required for players who don't want to interact with the combat situation that you have to put yourself in to get a mace. Because
I agree.
Even if you're sneaking around a trial chamber, you still need ominous keys for which you need to complete ominous trials. And I was thinking about it. I don't know how trial chambers work on peaceful mode, but I assume you can't complete ominous trials because you can never activate the spawner and you never get the rewards. You'd only get access to regular vault keys occasionally because you can get one of those keys from like a decorated pot in the dungeon, so you don't necessarily need to complete a trial spawner in order to get one. But either way, that means no mace for you because you don't get them from regular vaults, you get them from ominous vaults, you get the core. So I think, it's a little bit difficult when you're talking about applying it to a block transformation, something that should be available across the game for players who want to play in any style, especially builders, if you're talking about, getting resources that way. It feels like the mace should not be the gateway to those resources if it's something that you can't get hold of in peaceful mode. But then again, I'd say the same about shulker boxes, and you can't really get to the end very easily in peaceful mode either. So yeah, who am I to judge?
And there's also the inventory problem. Like if you added dented textures to blocks and you had to use the mace to create the dented or beaten up version of these blocks, then just like me having to carry around a hoe if I want to remove certain blocks quickly, like or shears to remove leaf blocks. It adds one more thing you've got to have in your hotbar, limiting the amount of blocks that you have ready to build. And I wouldn't want to also have to carry a mace around, regardless of how I got it, to then also dent these blocks. Like it would just, you'd have to find a way to like set them all up and dent them pre-build and then worry about the rest later, you know? Like, so it just would create a lot of, I would say, creative bottlenecks for people to use the mace in a creative way. I'm all for like additional uses for it in combat situations or in exploring situations. I think that's neat. But yeah, I agree with you. I think that it can't be something so important that players that have no interest in it feel like, oh great, well now I'm missing out and now I have to go get it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it's potentially something that we could see in new snapshots with experimental changes like the redstone and the minecart stuff. Like, pretty soon we could end up with experimental mace changes that might add functionality like that. But that's what we're going to move on to talk about. The first new snapshot for Minecraft 1.21, we presume minor releases, although, as it said in the changelog, a couple of these aren't slated for an official release. They are just the developers trying to play around with reworks of existing mechanics and get some feedback from the community about those. So where do we want to start? What's your preferred inroad into this conversation?
I thought the most interesting thing off the top was minecart changes, because even though in the grand scheme I have not been playing Minecraft as long as other people, I have been playing for 6 or 7 years now, and minecarts have never had a significant change that I remember.
Yeah.
Maybe some new redstone blocks that then affected the things that you could do with minecarts, but I was so new to it that like I'm not so deep into redstone and minecart mechanics that I was like, oh, this changes everything. For me, it was just like I used them for some nether transport when I first got into the game, and I've used them a little bit here and there for redstone traps and builds. But I think that this is really, really interesting, and I think they're really only going to get pushback from a vocal minority, and that is on the removal of stacking minecarts for entity cramming, because that's something that I use currently to kill the wither in our wither squisher. That's something that I use currently in the zombified piglin farm, the gold farm in the nether. There are other ways to do it, and it was shown, I think, I was watching a Zoomovoid's snapshot video, and if you drop the minecart in from a height and not actually put them in manually, then you can still stack them up. It's just that if you try to stack them all up on one rail yourself, it doesn't function. And that seems to be a byproduct of the improvements that they've made to minecarts, in that they won't react weirdly if they bump into one another. Like they tend to be more behaved alongside one another. They tend to be more behaved if they're on the same line and they bump into one another. They don't go all over the place. And by adding that feature, they removed the ability to have minecarts basically invisibly hover within one another, which I mean, I get, like, we really shouldn't be able to do that in terms of physics and how a game like this should work, but it's one of those things that has been in the game so long that people look at it like a feature. But I really like the improvements that they're making. I feel like I'm really curious to see how they will eventually implement the potential speed changes. I don't think it's going to be just a command. I think command is there to let players experiment with like faster minecarts and ludicrous speed minecarts. Like, I think that some of the videos I've seen have been hilarious and awesome and people are excited. Like, it's a very positive reaction. But I don't know what that means. Like, I don't want to go into the game and decide I want fast minecarts and then set that to, like, you know, speed 497. And that tends to be like my perfect speed. I'd rather have it be some sort of gameplay mechanic where, do we need a new kind of powered rail to reach max speed? Is it copper? Is it a new kind of minecart? Can I have a Lamborghini minecart? If I can it be white with a red interior? Like, there's all these things that I have where I want to have more fun with minecarts, not just more practical, more use case, but like, if you're going to make it faster, make it fun for us to make it faster. And I'm not criticizing the game rule. I think that's a great way to get feedback. It allows players to play with this huge range of like too much and too little. Like how slow is too slow, how fast is too fast. Where does it break? But maintaining the momentum, I think, is really neat. I saw some people shoot llamas in Minecraft and TNT in Minecraft like a mortar. Like there's all kinds of fun possibilities with the new mechanics. As an animator slash former animator, someone that has training in that space, I did feel that it was a little bit odd the way that the Minecraft kind of like ticks forward in the air when it changes its angle from going up in an arc to going down in an arc. Unless there's something in the minecart, that's not how it would typically react.
Yeah.
I've got a funny feeling that is designed around the player's point of view, so that when you go up in a minecart and you come down in a minecart, you're looking down as opposed to not looking where you're going.
Yeah.
So that's probably what that's from. But it looks very strange. If you wanted to add a little bit more fun to it, I think having the minecart coming down kind of like rear, there's no wheels, but like rear wheels down would be cool, because it would just feel a little bit more cartoonish, a little bit more you just jumped over, it's the kind of like the stuff where you do in your BMX when you're a kid, like you're jumping over a pile of stuff in the backyard, like that kind of thing. You'll want to land on the real wheel first, not the front wheels. Front wheels, bad news. So that kind of stuff I think could ignore physics a little bit, and like maybe the player view could point down, but if the minecart points up so that it looks good from the outside but still feels good from the inside, I think you could probably make some concessions there. And speaking of wheels, I think if we're going to be able to do this kind of stuff with minecarts, they could use a model update where they might actually have visible wheels to go on the rails.
And the question is, do you make the wheels square? That's the thing. Like circles,
absolutely, yeah.
Circles are heretical in Minecraft, but I like the idea of them having square wheels on minecarts. I think that's pretty funny.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I like the changes more or less across the board. Like I recognize that there are some things that break mechanically, and more technical people than I will have opinions on that stuff. So I'm gonna probably be fairly positive about this, where other players might think, oh, you're missing all of the stuff that breaks, and I don't know about all of the stuff that breaks. I know about piston bolts. I built them a couple of times, and I think I would honestly, even though the piston bolt is a really cool technical achievement, and I would argue against stuff like filtered hoppers, because that way you preserve item filters that the community has come up with, I wouldn't necessarily say the same about piston bolts, because they are really laborious to make. For a fairly minimal distance traveled, you still have to place a lot of stuff, and it's a huge endeavor. And I would much rather have a system where a minecart can speed up to the point where it's comparable or better than elytra travel in order to go long distances on, like, in the nether, for example, right? And so, yeah, I think the minecart changes are pretty cool across the board. I do like the fact that they change angle in the air. It gives you an idea of like the arc that they're going on a little bit, and the momentum that they have. And it feels like they stall after a certain point, in the same way that your elytra stall and you start to like drift back down. I would love minecart speed to be more dynamic by default instead of being triggered by a command. Like, I would like them to have maybe like a slower acceleration from powered rails. Maybe you'd have to stack a few powered rails for it to travel over before it really hit top speed, but have the top speed be faster makes more sense to me. But yeah, I think the fact that they've been able to adjust things so that they don't collide if you get two minecarts on separate rails next to each other, that's always bugged me. Like, whenever you've got simultaneous collection mechanisms going and you have to worry about tripping one minecart but not the one next to it, or the one next to it gets desynced and it travels at a different rate, like, that stuff is so frustrating to deal with. So it's good to see them ironing out stuff like that in the process of messing with what snaps to rails where and that kind of thing. I think it must honestly be really difficult to tweak minecarts without breaking stuff that people really rely on them for, even in like average gameplay conditions, like you or I putting together automatic furnace setups and item collection rails and that kind of stuff, just basic hopper minecart stuff. So I think it's bold of them to want to get these changes out there and gather community feedback, but I think the majority of players, the vast majority with average use cases, are going to be quite happy about these changes, and hopefully they can make some more changes that work for the people who use them in much more technical environments.
I think the idea with the piston bolts too is something that could be addressed by having the minecart speed be more fun to increase. You know, like if it
Yeah.
still requires some work, you still have to lay a track, you still have to lay intervals. I'm not sure how familiar you are with the hypertubes in Satisfactory. They are sort of the same thing. So trains in Satisfactory are cargo carrying big vehicles. But hypertubes are essentially like those pneumatic tubes that used to be used to move notes around in office buildings.
Yeah, it's
but in
like
a sci-fi environment.
the Futurama kind of tube system, right? Where
100%. Yeah. But the entrances stack. So if you have one entrance and you go in, you go to a certain speed. If you have three entrances stacked in front of each other like a couple of cannons, then it's like shoop, 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 and then you're going 3 times the speed that you would have done had you just used one.
Right.
Same thing with player momentum. If you shoot yourself up in the air and have a little bit of a hop, and then you're using gravity going down as you enter the hypertube, then it takes your speed from gravity and then adds the speed of the hypertube to it. You can go silly fast in these things, and it is really fun because you can put jumps in for pure fun. You can just have yourself go around in loops. You can do whatever you want, and I do find that it's really fun to mess with. And if something like that happened when you got in a minecart where the first powered rail gave you a boost, and then the second one gave you another boost, and if you had to like space them out a certain way where you had to allow the minecart to get to max speed of third rail before it hits fourth rail, and you kind of have to time it out. But if you got player feedback where you could have like higher wind noises, if you're playing on bedrock or messing around on a controller, maybe the controller vibrates as you go faster. Like there's some stuff that you could do visually and I think audio wise to indicate to the player you are going much faster than you were a few seconds ago. And that can be really fun because then it has that, not sci-fi, but it has that movie quality of like get in the car and zoom away, like speeding off and squealing the tires vibe.
Yeah.
And I think if you can introduce fun to the idea of faster minecarts, then I think that would be great. I'm not sure if you remember this, but way back in the day, we were talking about how to improve minecarts on the show. And one of the things that I thought would be really interesting would be the ability to have minecarts go up on banks, like go up on sideways. And if they're going fast enough, they could like stick to walls and bank around corners. But the argument, of course, was like, well, how does that change the player's point of view? And now they've introduced this control where the player is kind of always facing the proper direction. And I think it opens up a lot for potential roller coasters, even just the changes that they've added now. But I'm really curious if they can get into silly stuff like sideways minecarts or even just the ability to have a minecart bounce off of things. So even if there's no rails on a wall, if you could shoot the minecart into the wall, have it almost do like a grind down the wall and then land on another rail and take off in a different direction at the bottom, like that could be really fun to have the minecart get a jump but correct its momentum midair and then still have it continue on a track. There's some real opportunities here for people that design roller coasters in Minecraft to have a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I've seen a couple already on the Minecraft Reddit where people have like almost little stunt courses where they'll start a minecart off and then they'll fling themselves into the air with a riptide trident and like catch a minecart mid-air and be on a different track and then like do a little kind of parkour challenge for themselves. And there's kind of trick courses like that you can set up really well, and it all feels like kinetic and interesting and fun. And locking FOV to the minecart, I like the fact that it's in the game but toggleable, and if you could set that up to be a hotkey, I feel like that'd be even better, right? Because then you could trigger it like without having to open the video settings to mess with that stuff. I think that'd be like the goal, the ideal scenario, personally. And there's plenty of keys available on a standard keyboard. Obviously, that changes when you've got different control systems, but there's a limit to what you can do in a minecart anyway, so I'm sure they could find a spare button somewhere to, like, lock on your field of view, similar to, like, locking on in combat in a different type of game. Yeah, so I think minecarts in general are the thing that I feel most confident about enjoying out of these three. Should we talk about redstone changes? This is something that I haven't messed with much myself, but I've watched Mumbo Jumbo's video on this, and he's going to be, you know, again, he's going to have a relatively narrow view of it compared to the broader redstone community, but he also points out in the video he's been doing stuff with redstone for a while, so I at least trust his opinion on where the redstone changes are going. And I think a lot of it makes sense on paper. I think some stuff, I agree with him, didn't really need to be changed all that much, or is being changed for performance reasons, which makes sense when people are running with older hardware, but is going to be of minimal benefit to people who are a little bit further down the hardware rabbit hole. And then it's a really unusual thing to make changes to with Redstone, because making it more logical sometimes makes it worse. And I think that's a really difficult conundrum when Redstone is known for being this sandboxy, quirky mechanic that is what, elevates it in the eyes of Java Minecraft players.
I watched Mumbo's video as well. I was excited that he made it, and I really enjoyed how balanced his response was. Despite how niche he is with his opinion on Redstone, he also mentioned, like, hey, Redstone has changed a number of times since I've been playing the game.
Yeah.
And I've, a lot of these builds behind me, in the sea of Redstone that he's done, no longer work because of that. And they're introduce, new challenges for that. When you have new changes, there are also like retrofits that have to happen when something no longer works. But very often I feel like Redstone designers can adapt to what's happening in the game. And I think one of the reasons that I have not gotten more into Redstone is because when you have something like that doesn't work as logically as you expect, and then you're forced to watch tutorials or watch or go to the wiki to try to figure out, well, wait, how does this actually work? I feel like if it's more logical, specifically the stuff with updates happening in a straight line from the Redstone source, like that to me makes a lot of sense. I don't know why it was the other way, especially if you can remove the idea of farms that have to be oriented in a certain way in the world in order to get the updates right. Like that to me always is like, well, I want to build this farm, but I don't want to build it north, south, or east, west. I want to build it the other way because of where I am in the world, how my builds are going. And when you're forced to build it a certain way for it to function, that feels kind of strange and takes the sandbox into Minecraft when you want this very specific redstone thing and it can only be built in a certain orientation. But I liked how he explained everything. And you and I have spoken a number of times on the show about visual redstone explanations are far better than reading change logs or having someone explain it to you live in Twitch chat as you're trying to mess around with stuff.
I glaze over, and every time I read anything about Redstone in text, I have to then go and try and do it myself. Otherwise, it just doesn't make any sense to me. It goes in one ear and out the other.
Yeah, and the changelog and the new format for the changelog is good. They do break things down pretty well. They do have an image, in terms of random versus not random. But I really enjoyed Mumbo's take on the randomness. And at first when I heard it, I was like, I don't know, random in Redstone is not something I don't think anybody else is really looking for. But what I appreciated about the explanation is this is such a specific setup for this to be random that you would be very unlikely to stumble upon this in your build and have it be functioning in a weird way that you didn't expect, versus you would be specifically looking for a randomizer and building this on purpose to try and create this effect once you understood how Redstone worked in terms of the block update order. And so I feel like a block left or right giving you the desired outcome and a block right in the middle giving you the random outcome, I don't necessarily think is a bad thing. If they're going to introduce it, it seems like, funny that you mentioned it earlier, a logical way to introduce that kind of randomness to it. I like the speed at which some new stuff is happening. The instant dropper line that he showed off, I thought was really cool.
Mm-hmm.
That I did not know that was possible even in regular Minecraft, and I knew that it was in the current state of Redstone in the game. I knew that it would happen at certain tick speeds. I most of the time when you're doing something vertically, you have to update all those blocks, but the way that this was done, it happened almost instantaneously, and it reminded me of the way that players use wall updates and observers to transmit Redstone signal. And you combine that with a couple of other Redstone mechanics, and I think you come up with some really, really cool stuff. So I feel like a lot of the Redstone changes were pretty good. I don't have a lot of complaints, but again, I'm not that niche audience that is so into Redstone that any change at all is going to break all kinds of stuff. And to that, I have to say, the world changes. You've got the game is going to change. The game is going to move on. Specifically, if they're changing things for lag or performance reasons, I think that's a good move. And if it breaks part of the game, well, that's part of having a game that's got free updates for the last 15 years. Like things
Yeah.
are just going to change, not necessarily in the way that you want. I'm struggling right now to try to think of a change that has happened recently where we were both like, this is really not good, but I'm drawing a blank right now.
Yeah.
In terms of like more general gameplay, like the stuff that tends to be changed that gets, I'll call it an uproar, but again, it's usually from a vocal minority, is usually very niche. The people that are upset about the niche changing are like, wow, you ruined this niche thing that I did. But you don't necessarily hear about like sweeping changes. I guess the closest thing would be like the changes that they were playing around with making to combat. That would have been the
Yeah.
last time I heard some vitriol from a larger portion of the community, right?
Yeah, that or villager updates, but even then there were two sides to that argument, right? Like I think we found the good side of that as well as discussing some of the potential negatives, and we still get emails about the villager update changes, but
Sure,
they don't even have any changes that are like in snapshots like these anymore. Like they're still part of that experiments tab, but that seems to have that's branch of development seems to have gone quiet in favor of some stuff like this, some more technical stuff. And so yeah, Redstone changes, I think I'm less confident in than the minecart changes in terms of if it was implemented like what is in this snapshot. I feel like I would maybe run into some fringe cases where this didn't work the way I expected it to. And in Mumbo's video, he even pointed out there are a couple of places where it's inconsistent, where, if you put a lever in a certain place and there's a shorter redstone wire on a longer redstone wire, sometimes the longer one takes priority even though it shouldn't, and there's just like edge cases where it's not quite fully programmed in to be fully like deterministic, but there's room for it to improve, and a few things that the team may just have missed whilst they were putting together the code for this. I think the main issue I have in this snapshot is bundle stuff. Are we ready to talk about bundle stuff?
Yep, we can talk about the bundles.
I started, like, I'd read the changelog and thought, oh, okay, cool, this sounds like, they're implementing bundles, they've got a new UI for them, let me check this out. I started looking into them this morning so that I could have something to say about it on the podcast, and I immediately felt compelled to make a video about how much I didn't like them. And I feel bad about that because I'm normally quite a positive guy, and I try not to be super negative, and I was at least trying to be constructive with how I was putting this. But I think these bundles are implemented worse, and more thoughts on the video because I think maybe I articulate it a little bit better there, but I'm still very happy bundles are in the game. They still do a lot of the stuff that they did before. In fact, they do everything that they did before. They have a slightly different control scheme, and that was the first point where I went, oh, okay, I'm going to have to completely reprogram my muscle memory of how to use bundles. Because there used to be one button that interacted with the bundle, which was right-clicking. You either right-click to put something in it, if you're holding the bundle, or if you're holding the item, you right-click to add the item to the bundle. And then you right-click to take it out of the bundle again. So it kind of felt like you could use that relatively quickly, just with one button. Now, left-clicking adds stuff to the bundle, and right-clicking removes stuff. But left-clicking is also what you use to pick up the bundle when you're not adding something to it. And right-clicking is what you use to pull stuff out, but then right-clicking is still used for all of the stuff it's normally used for in your inventory, like splitting a stack and everything, right? And it just doesn't feel as consistent with how we already interact with inventory, because you attach an item to the cursor by left-clicking, so it feels like, if anything, you should be left-clicking to pull an item out of a bundle, because you're picking something up, you're just picking it out of a container that's like a sub-container within your inventory. And then right-clicking has a variety of ways it's like how you interact with like a lever or a button or something. So that like the use cases for left and right-clicking are kind of nebulous, and bundles feel like an exception to how we interact with inventory anyway. So it doesn't quite feel right to me that the way you interact with them has changed. I think it's probably something I would just have to train myself to do, and it's because I've been using bundles on and off since 1.17 that it feels like a hurdle for me to get over. I also don't know how they're going to do some of this stuff on mobile devices, because it feels like the controls are even more nuanced than they were, and yet they're still implementing these on Bedrock Edition, which is how come I want people to write in and talk to me about it. I also still think that bundles would really benefit from like a click and drag mechanic that unpacks the bundle into inventory spaces that you drag over, and I think that would be a lot more intuitive way of emptying it into your inventory, especially if you're trying to get to items that are further down the bundle, which is something else that this bundle implementation tries to give you access to, but I think doesn't get 100% of the way there.
So I agree with the UI interactive changes. That sounds like the opposite of how I would want to interact with a bundle in the inventory. And I like your example of interacting with a lever or a button in the world, because that's how I want to interact with something in my inventory is right click.
Yeah.
Right. Like to interact with it, to pick it up is left, to interact with it is right. And if a bundle is going to allow me to interact with it within my inventory, like I want the interact button to be the right click. And using it, I think, in that way makes sense. I liked the idea of the UI preview that the bundle has, showing you 8 items or less. I wasn't keen on additional items being hidden.
Yeah.
Because that to me was just like, well, now like you've taken something cool and useful and made it far less useful by hiding stuff.
Yeah.
Now that said, I'm also someone that plays with a mod that allows me to peek inside of shulker boxes and see what's inside of them.
Mm-hmm.
I cannot interact with them in the inventory. It's a window that says this is what's in here. And if you had 4 shulker boxes in your inventory that were all white, then at least you could hover over them and just press shift and just see what's inside of them.
Yeah.
And I think with the bundle, you'd have to be very specific into which order you put things in, so that you could at least tell, this is my bundle with all of my rarities in it, this is my bundle with all the crap cobblestone in it, like all that kind of stuff. I see the use case for them in terms of like picking up items that don't stack and you've got very little of, and kind of putting them all together in one place in your inventory, but not being able to see the full contents is kind of annoying. I do like the crafting recipe change. I think that switching over to leather instead of rabbit hide makes it more accessible early game. You don't have to kill bunnies in the game if you don't want to. I feel like there's a lot of benefits there. It's a lot more straightforward in that way. So on the surface, like I feel like they were going in the right direction with the UI hints and stuff, but overall, it just feels more complicated than the benefit that I get out of it. And I understand I'm coming at this as an endgame player and as someone that has never messed with bundles in game, like outside of maybe a brief snapshot. I've just not had them as data packs. I've not implemented them through mods. Like I just haven't used them. And so I don't have to untrain my brain. However they eventually land will be how they land for me. And I'm at a stage where, and I think I would even say this about starting over, just get shulker boxes. Like if this kind of functionality is really what you want and you're good at Minecraft, then just go get your shulker boxes. And I know that that's a very endgame opinion, but it's one of those things where like they seem to be doing the same thing a shulker box can do poorly.
That's the thing, is you would need 3 shulker boxes to accommodate the variety of unique items you can store in a bundle. So like if you had one of 64 different items, you could put all of those in one inventory space and it would take up 64 inventory spaces otherwise, right? So like on paper, they're a really good organizational tool, and people who like use them that way get a lot out of them. But I can see the logic behind like, well, what I want is more room to carry around all of the building materials that I have, and those are always coming in basically full stacks, right? So there's definitely some logic to that. I still think the bundle has a really important niche in Minecraft gameplay, and it gets overlooked. I've been the biggest advocate for the bundle since it was originally announced, and I think with the new UI, they have made it worse. And you hit the nail on the head. It's the fact that it hides the items that are in it once it gets beyond a certain capacity. And it doesn't even store 8 items and then hide the rest, because it stores it in rows of inventory. So there's 4 items on the bottom row, 4 items on the top row. But then when you start another row, when you add another item, when you add a 9th item in, it doesn't just shuffle everything along to the right by 1 and then hide the last item in the row. It starts an additional row with just 1 item in it, and it hides the bottom row that was in there before, and it also hides the last item on the row that was your previous top row, so it can let you know how many other items in the bundle. So you've gone from seeing 8 items to seeing 4, even though there are now 9 items in the bag. And it's so confusing. And that's the thing. Like, I think being able to interact with the contents of a bundle is, in theory, a really good thing. I think the scroll wheel number key is a decent solution to allow players to interact. I think it's also kind of cute that you can see the item sprite peeking out of the bundle when you have it selected. I posted a picture in the snapshot chat in our Discord where I put some redstone dust in there, and I selected the redstone dust. And if you middle click in creative, you can pick up the item sprite without it like going back to the normal bundle sprite. And I said, look, forbidden cherry pie. And it just kind of looked like this little kind of cherry tart or something. But then, like, on the flip side, it's affected some of the ways you can move the items around your inventory. So, like, I use the number keys to move items to and from my hotbar a lot. So if I want to, like, swap my sword out for a building block, I hit 3 on the building block and it swaps my sword for the blocks. You can't do that with bundles anymore because the number keys, if you hover over them, select something from the bundle's UI,
Right.
even if there aren't any items in there that correspond to that number. So if you have 3 items in the bundle, you hit 4, it does nothing, but it also doesn't move the bundle to your hotbar slot number 4. It just stays in your inventory. And so it's holding on to that functionality for the use case in which there are a certain number of items in the bundle. You're never going to need the number 9 for that because the bundle only shows you 8 items, but it won't let you move it to slot 9 of your hotbar either. So that's one of the things that's frustrating to me as somebody who's gotten really used to hotkeying my inventory that way, which is not everybody's playstyle, certainly doesn't affect people on different control schemes, but as a keyboard and mouse user, a frustration for me. But the main thing is, I know the interface is designed to keep this first in, last out approach to the bundle, but it feels weird to have items added from right to left, for one thing. In English, we're used to reading from left to right, and so naturally we're used to the newest piece of information starting in the top left, and then you kind of read on from there. And the way they've organized it with rows, you start a row on the right-hand side and then fill it up right to left. And like I said, you lose an entire row when you add a 9th unique item, and you also lose the last item on the second row for it telling you how many items are hidden. You lose so much information in just doing that, and that's not even counting the fact that you can add up to 64 items. Like, the end of that is, like, you have 59 items hidden out of 63 that you've got in your bundle, or something absurd like that, and it just doesn't show you what's in there. And I think a lot of people are going to be using bundles to clear up the miscellaneous stuff from their inventory, right? The use case is always, you've got a couple of seeds, a few flowers, 2 or 3 building blocks, some fences, a crafting table. You want all of that stuff out of the way. But that's not organized in a way that makes sense in the examples you gave, where you're hiding away precious resources in one bundle, or maybe like food in another, and you're trying to be more organized with it. People don't typically use the bundle that way, from my experience. They use the bundle to just clear up all of the miscellaneous junk. And so you have no idea what's in that once you have a couple of rows of items in there and you're hiding everything else behind this. Like, there are 30 more items in this bundle icon that doesn't really allow you to interact with those items in any way. And that feels bad to me because you're losing information. We've had a version of the bundle where you can see absolutely everything that's in it, even if it was impossible to access that stuff without swapping a few items in and out, or adding a bone so that it brings the stack of bones up to the surface so you can take it out because it was the last thing you put in. I don't want to keep more than 8 items in a bundle now, and that feels absurd to me because it feels like the whole thing is designed so that you can keep a lot of different unique items in there. I think the UI feels like a compromise that's sacrificing information for functionality, and it doesn't feel good to me. Honestly, my favorite use case for a bundle is putting in an ender chest, a crafting table, a stone cutter, and maybe a furnace, and keeping those 4 items in there so that you can pull them out whenever you want them. And I think if you just bundled those 4 and never use the bundle for anything else, it's still beneficial to you, in the same way that those inventory mods that allow you to swap out, like, an individual space in your hotbar, and you can kind of scroll through which utility workstation block do I want to place down. You could use it like that, and I think it would be quite successful. But then don't let me put in a ton of items over the top and bury my crafting table somewhere I can't get to it at short notice. if you're going to have the bundle be something that you can select items from, let me select all 64 or don't give me the option. I feel like it's just making the gameplay frustratingly limiting rather than not giving us that side of interacting with it at all and forcing us to work with those limitations, which I had gotten very comfortable with up until this point.
If they changed the inventory capacity of a bundle to say something like 16,
and showed you all 16,
it showed you all 16, would
I'd
that
be on board.
Be a compromise?
I mean, it would be a compromise, and it'd be bad for the bundle, especially when people said, like, 64 isn't enough. Like, a lot of people are very keen on this being a storage container instead of an organizational tool, which is why the shulker box comparison comes up a lot, and people always say, you know, this is just proof that Mojang isn't going to work on inventory capacity in any way. The idea is that you tidy away clutter, and not that you have a backpack to carry around, right? And people don't necessarily vibe with that, so the idea that you could not store even a stack in there, and the other thing about the bundle is the reason the stack size is 64 is so you could also, in theory, put an unstackable item in there, like an enchanted book, and then give it to somebody as a gift, or like put a diamond sword in there and throw that to somebody and say, here, I got you a present from the, you know, the weapon shop or whatever. And like with limiting the stack size to 16, that's like 4 ender pearls, you know what I mean? Like there's not a whole lot you can do with that. And so I do think you limit potentially what the bundle could be used for by reducing it to underneath the stack anyway. But I would almost take it in favor of a UI that I could actually interact with. And I think, again, my concern is that this is a concession that's had to be made for Java Edition players because it makes it in line with and in parity with the version that we're going to see on mobile devices, which I still don't know how people are going to interact with, but maybe the touchscreen element would give you an advantage over what you can select from the bundle to pull out of it again. But yeah, I still don't see this being an improvement. Like, it still has all the same functionality it used to, but it feels worse to me. I can't quite reconcile that in my head.
Yeah, they've gone around the bend on it, and I feel like they've driven past where it was improvement, and they've delved so deep into it, and then they're now hindering the use cases for it. Like it was going well, they improved it, but then they kept improving it, and it's now gone the other side. We're going down the other side of the hill.
Maybe.
They don't seem appealing, especially from someone like you that has a lot of experience with them, has found some very cool and very useful ways to organize. The idea of keeping, you know, your furnace and your smelter and your cutting stone, like all those things in there, makes a lot of sense, right? That's a good way to have those non-stackables, you know, like or those utility blocks with you in a one confined space.
Yeah.
If you're going caving or something in the game, that makes a lot of sense. But like, it feels like because of the changes that they've made, even someone like you that sees the potential is just frustrated with the way that they are headed at present. And I think that they need to take them back, not to the drawing board, but like, I think they need to look closely at what they're used for, not just what Mojang wants them used for, but what players are currently using them for, including players that are using them in data packs or adding them to the game with mods. Like, it's just, how are they being used? Like, what's the most common use case for them when it's not, as you said, just turning it into a shulker box as a backpack? Like, when it's used it, you know, in the context that you're talking about.
I think the most telling thing was on the article itself, they even said, if you're not happy with the fact that it hides some of the items, maybe consider having multiple bundles in your inventory. And I'm like, you mean increase the clutter in my inventory that this thing is supposed to solve? Come on, guys.
Yeah, I saw that
like,
too.
Yeah, I don't want to be unfair to them, and these are still in the experimental stages. So hopefully we'll see a bit more player feedback. We'll see some of those ideas collected, and maybe it'll be in a slightly better place by the time they're implemented, whether that's in a minor update to 1.21 or a future update in major way. We'll see. Either way, that will do it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Spawn Chunks. You can find more information about the show and links to some of the stuff that we talked about today over at thespawnchunks.com. The music for the show is composed by me, and The Spawn Chunks is proud as ever to be a listener-supported podcast. If you're getting some value out of the show, why not consider putting some value back in? You can do that at patreon.com/thespawnchunks. Pledging at any level gets you an invite to our patrons-only Discord chat. You can listen to the show live and watch the show live when we record it in Discord every Monday. We also have our monthly Minecraft audio hangouts where our patrons get to share what they've been up to in Minecraft that month. We currently have 316 patrons, which is up 2 from last week. Thank you to the 2 of you for jumping on board. And special thanks go out to our content engineer patrons, Gundar H. Striker, Hunter555, Jumbo Sale, Mindtrip Media, Party Voyager, and Yitz. Thank you for your support on this episode.
Sharing the podcast with your friends is the easiest way to support the show. You can find us at the Spawn Chunks on social media. New episodes are available on Mondays on all of your favorite podcasting platforms. And of course, the video version is available on YouTube. You can email the show at spawnchunkmail@gmail.com. The RSS feed is linked on the spawnchunks.com, and the patron-only RSS feed is on our Patreon page. That's where you can listen to the render distance, the extended version of the program.
My name is Johnny, but online I go by Pixelriffs. You can find most of what I do at youtube.com/pixelriffs, where the Minecraft Survival Guide is currently in its 3rd season. I also stream 3 days a week on Twitch, where right now I've joined the Fantasy Minecraft SMP, and I'm having a lot of fun Dungeons and Dragonsing it up with my friends. I'm also the voice of the unofficial Hermitcraft recap, which you can find through a quick YouTube search. And aside from that, I'm at Pixelriffs on both Twitter and Instagram. Joel, where can people find you online?
Everything that I'm doing online can be found at joelduggan.com. That includes a link to the Citadel Cafe, my podcast about sci-fi and fantasy entertainment. Stephen ESC, who plays with me on the Citadel server, joined me on the show to talk about Deadpool and Wolverine on the most latest episode. It was a lot of fun. We both really enjoyed that movie. You can find me at Joel Duggan on Twitch and on social media. I'm very easy to find. I stream Wednesday through Saturday on Twitch. Right now, it's focusing on the Iron Farm, but eventually I will be returning to West Hill and finishing up that build. And on Fridays, I do build Lego live on stream.
Thanks for visiting the Spawn Chunks. The world outside is infinite, but you can't see most of it.